Close your eyes for a second. If you grew up on an American farm in the 1950s, your nose remembers things your eyes forgot. The smell that hit you the moment the barn door slid open before sunrise. The one that meant mom was up and breakfast was close. Some of these smells have nearly vanished from modern life, scrubbed away by sealed packaging, climate control, and stores that sell everything in plastic. Number 14 on this list disappeared the day the power lines finally reached your county. And number 6, well, that one separated the kids who grew up on a real working farm from everyone else. These are 25 smells every farm kid from the 1950s would recognize in a heartbeat. Hit subscribe if your childhood had dirt under its fingernails, and let's count them down, starting with number 25. Number 25. For most farm kids, the day started with a sound and a smell arriving together. The cough of the farm awl or the John Deere turning over, and that blue cloud of half-burned gasoline and diesel rolling across the yard. By the mid-1950s, the tractor had pushed the horse team out of most fields, and with it came a brand new perfume, sharp, oily, faintly sweet, the smell of a machine waking up in the cold. A gallon of gas ran about 20 cents, and Dad guarded the red can in the shed like treasure. You learned to love that exhaust because it meant the hard work got a little easier, that the plowing that once took a week of sweat and horseflesh now took an afternoon. Stand downwind of an old tractor today and suddenly you are 8 years old again, watching your father disappear down the rows. Number 24. Step inside the machine shed and the air changed completely. Here lived the heavy, dark smell of motor oil and axle grease, of cold steel and gritty rags hung on a nail. Dad kept a grease gun and a row of dented cans, and on rainy days when the fields were too wet to work, he'd be out there with his hands black to the wrist, tightening, oiling, swearing gently at a stubborn bolt. The floor was packed dirt, soaked with decades of drippings, and that smell never really left it. A boy could spend an hour just watching, breathing in oil and rust and the metallic tang of a wrench, learning the names of tools the way other kids learned ball players. That smell meant patience, and it meant fixing what you had, because on a 1950s farm, you did not throw away anything you could mend. Number 23. Out along the property line, the fence posts carried a smell all their own. Creosote, black and tarry and strong enough to sting your eyes on a hot day. Farmers dipped or painted their posts with it to keep them from rotting in the wet ground, and the same dark stuff coated the railroad ties down by the tracks. On a July afternoon, with the sun baking the wood, that heavy chemical sweetness hung over the whole fence line. Kids walking the rows to check for breaks knew it well, the way it clung to your hands if you grabbed a post to climb over. A drum of creosote was cheap insurance against replacing posts every few years. Today, they'll tell you the stuff was hazardous, and maybe it was, but to a farm kid it simply smelled like the edge of the world, the boundary of everything you owned. Number 22. Nobody who ever gathered eggs forgot the smell of the hen house. It was warm and close and feathery, a thick mix of dust, droppings, straw, and the dry, papery scent of the birds themselves. You ducked through the low door at dusk, and the whole flock muttered and shifted on the roost while you slid a hand under each hen for the still warm eggs. The ammonia bite caught in the back of your throat if the coop needed cleaning, which it always did. Eggs were money in those days, a dozen bringing maybe 30 cents at the store, and the hen house was the kids' domain, a daily chore before school. That smell of feathers and grain dust and warm birds is gone from most American lives now, sealed away in industrial barns nobody ever enters. but a farm kid could find it blindfolded. Number 21. Then there was the hog lot, and there is no polite way to describe it. The smell of pigs was honest and overpowering, a wall of warm mud, manure, and sour feed that announced itself long before you reached the fence. On a still summer evening, it could travel half a mile and settle over the whole farm. But the kids who slopped those hogs morning and night stopped noticing after a while, and there was even something comforting in it. The smell of animals growing fat and a winter's worth of bacon and ham coming on. Hogs were the mortgage payment on 4 legs. You poured the bucket of table scraps and ground corn over the fence and watched them shove and squeal, and the smell was simply the price of the meat that would fill the smokehouse come fall. Number 20. Even after the tractors came, most farms still kept a tack room, and stepping into it was like stepping into another century. Leather was the smell here, rich and oily and deep, the scent of harness and bridles, and an old saddle gone dark with use. Hanging on pegs along the wall, the collars and traces soaked in neatsfoot oil gave off a smell that was almost good enough to eat. A farmer rubbed that oil into the leather by lamplight to keep it from cracking, and a good harness was expected to last a generation. Kids loved the tack room for the quiet of it, the cool dimness, the creak of leather when you lifted a bridle down. That smell meant the old way of doing things, the horses that had broken the land before the engines arrived, and it lingered long after the last team was sold. Number 19. And the horses themselves had a smell no farm kid ever lost. A team of Belgians or Percherons coming in from a morning's work gave off a warm, grassy, slightly sour scent of sweat and hide, the leather of the harness, and the hay on their breath. You led them to the trough and watched them drink, the steam rising off their flanks in the cool air, and you breathed in that big, living animal warmth. By the 1950s, the workhorse was already fading, replaced by horsepower of the mechanical kind, but plenty of farms kept a team for the back 40 or for sentiment's sake. To rub a hand down a sweaty horse's neck and smell that honest animal smell was to feel for a moment like you belonged to something older and slower and kinder than the machines taking over the fields. Number 18. Monday was wash day, and the whole house filled with the smell of it. The harsh, clean bite of lye soap, the steams off the copper boiler, the bluing in the rinse water, all of it mixing into a smell that meant scrubbed knuckles and a long morning's work. Mother boiled the whites, ran them through the wringer, and pinned them out on the line, and by afternoon the sheets came in carrying the single best smell of the entire week. Sunshine and wind dried right into the cotton. Homemade Lawai soap was strong enough to take the hide off you, made from saved fat and wood ash in a tradition older than the country itself. There was no fabric softener, no dryer sheet, no perfume in a bottle that ever matched a bedsheet dried on the line in a prairie breeze. A farm kid slept in that smell. Number 17. When the seasons turned and the heavy clothes came down from the attic, the mothballs came with them. That sharp, medicinal, unmistakable smell of camphor clung to the winter coats and woolen blankets folded away in trunks all summer long. Grandma's cedar chest had its own version, sweeter and woodier. The cedar planks meant to do the same job the mothballs did, keeping the moths out of the good wool. You'd pull on a coat in October and smell the whole summer it had spent in storage. It was the smell of the parlor closet, the spare room, the church clothes brought out for Sunday. Modern homes rarely smell of it anymore, But for anyone who grew up opening that chest, one whiff of camphor drops them straight back into a cold bedroom and the scratch of a wool coat against the neck. Number 16. Down by the silo lived one of the strangest smells on the whole farm, and farm kids either loved it or hated it. Silage, chopped corn packed tight and left to ferment, gave off a sour, sweet, almost beery smell that some folks compared to pickles and others to spoiled wine. When Dad climbed up to fork it down to the cattle on a winter morning, that warm, tangy reek rolled out of the silo door and across the lot. The cows loved it, crowding the fence at feeding time. It was the smell of stored summer, of green corn put up in September to carry the herd through the snow. City folks who got a noseful for the first time made faces, but a farm kid breathed it in like a memory because that fermented sweetness meant the animals would eat well no matter how deep the winter got. Number 15. Before propane and electric ranges, the kitchen ran on a wood-burning cook stove, and its smoke was the heartbeat smell of the farmhouse. Split oak and hickory, fed into the firebox before dawn, sent a thin blue thread up the chimney that you could smell clear across the yard. Inside, that wood smoke mixed with everything Mother cooked, perfuming the biscuits and the coffee and the very walls of the house. On a frosty morning, walking back from the barn, that smell of home fire was the most welcome thing in the world, a promise of warmth and breakfast just beyond the door. The cook stove asked for constant feeding and gave back heat for the whole main room, and a kid's job was often to keep the wood box full. To this day, a campfire or a fireplace can pull a farm child right back into that kitchen. Number 14. Before the power lines came, light itself had a smell. The kerosene lamp, coal oil the old folks called it, burned with a faint, oily odor that filled every farmhouse after sundown. You trimmed the wick, polished the glass chimney with a wad of newspaper, and lit it for supper and homework and the long evenings of winter. That smell of burning kerosene mixed with the warmth of the lamp glass was the smell of every night before electricity. And then, sometime in the 1950s, the rural electrification men strung their wires down the county road, and one evening a farm kid flicked a switch and the kitchen filled with light and no smell at all. The lamps went up on the shelf for emergencies. The whole nation changed in that moment, and a smell that had lit every American night for 100 years quietly faded away. Number 13. Plenty of farmhouses heated with coal, and the coal furnace had a smell all its own. There was the dusty, mineral smell of the coal pile in the cellar, the gritty black chunks shoveled into the furnace, and then the heavier smoke that drifted from the chimneys of a whole countryside on a January morning. A kid's chore was to carry the scuttle up from the bin and bank the fire for the night, and the coal dust got into everything, under your nails and on your clothes. That smell of burning coal hung over towns and farms alike in winter, a smell most Americans never encounter anymore. But anyone who grew up shoveling it remembers the particular bite of coal smoke in cold air, and the slow, even warmth that came up through the floor registers once the furnace finally caught. Number 12. Open the door of the granary or scoop into the feed bin, and a wave of dry, dusty sweetness rolled up to meet you. Shelled corn, oats, ground mash, the chop mixed for the hogs and chickens, each had its own smell, but together they made the warm, grainy perfume of the feed room. There was nothing sharp about it, just a deep, nutty, dusty smell that settled in your lungs and on your clothes. Kids ran the scoop through the corn, just to hear it rattle and to breathe that smell in. The mash for the hens, sometimes mixed with a little warm water, gave off a smell so rich the animals came running. It was the smell of plenty, of bins full after harvest, of a farm that had laid in enough to make it through to spring. An empty bin smelled of nothing at all, and that was the worst smell of the year. Number 11. When the frost finally went out of the ground and the plow turned the first furrows of spring, the whole farm filled with the smell of fresh-turned earth. It was dark and damp and mineral, the smell of soil rolling up off the plowshare in long ribbons, of roots and worms, and a winter's worth of rest turned up to the sun. Farmers swore they could smell whether the ground was ready. Behind the plow walked the gulls and the blackbirds, and behind them walked the kids, breathing in that rich, loamy smell that meant the growing season had begun again. There is no smell more hopeful than newly plowed ground, the promise of the whole year's crop folded into that dark dirt. A farm kid learned early that this smell meant work, but it also meant life, the eternal bargain of putting seed in the soil. Number 10. After a long dry spell when the dust lay thick on the lane and the corn curled in the heat, the first fat drops of a summer storm hitting that hot dust released the most beloved smell in all of farm country. Scientists have a fancy name for it now, but every farm kid just called it the smell of rain. Coming, it rose up off the gravel and the parched fields in a wave, sweet and earthy and electric, mixed with the green smell of relief from the crops. Children ran out onto the porch to watch the curtain of rain sweep across the section, breathing it in as the temperature dropped and the dust turned to mud. In a country where rain meant the difference between a good year and a ruined one, no perfume ever bottled could match the smell of a thunderstorm breaking a July drought. Number 9. And then there was the smell that defined a working farm more than any other: manure. The barnyard, the gutter behind the stanchions, the spread fields in spring, there was no escaping it, and a farm kid stopped smelling it entirely after the first few years. To outsiders, it was overpowering, but to the people who lived there, it was simply the smell of animals and land and the cycle that fed everything. Cow manure, forked out of the barn and piled to age, went back onto the fields to grow next year's crop, the oldest kind of recycling there is. The honest, earthy, unmistakable smell of a barnyard meant livestock thriving and ground being fed. City cousins held their noses on a visit, but the farm kid just laughed, because to him that smell wasn't dirty at all. It was the smell of home and of everything home depended on. Number 8. Come late summer, the farm kitchen turned into a factory, and the smell of canning took over the whole house for weeks. Tomatoes scalding in the pot, the sharp vinegar tang of pickling brine, dill and garlic and cucumbers, peaches and beans and corn, all of it bubbling away while Mother sealed mason jars by the dozen. The steam fogged the windows, and the smell of hot vinegar caught in the back of your throat, mixing with the sweet smell of stewing fruit. It was hot, hard work, but every sealed jar carried down to the cellar was a meal saved for January. Kids snapped beans and peeled tomatoes until their fingers stained, breathing in that whole house smell of summer being put up. A cellar shelf lined with bright jars was a kind of wealth, and the smell of canning was the smell of a family making sure of the winter. Number 7. Down in the root cellar, where the temperature stayed cool and even all year, lived the rich, sweet, slightly fermented smell of stored apples. Bushel baskets of them, picked in the fall and laid up for the months ahead, gave off a perfume that filled the dark little room, mixed with the earthy smell of potatoes, onions, and squash in their bins. By midwinter, that apple smell had deepened, a few of them always going soft and cidery, and the whole cellar carried it. Upstairs, when the cider press came out in October, the smell of crushed apples and fresh sweet cider hung over the whole operation, sharp and golden. A farm kid sent down to the cellar for a jar of preserves came back up with that smell in his clothes. It was the smell of fall stored against the cold, of a harvest that kept on giving long after the trees went bare. Number 6. This was the smell that separated the kids who grew up on a real working farm from everyone else. Come the first hard cold of late fall, butchering day arrived, and with it the smokehouse fired up for the long work of curing the winter's meat. Hams and bacon and sausage, rubbed with salt and brown sugar and hung in the dim little building, slowly took on the smell of smoldering hickory and apple wood that drifted across to the whole farm for days. The sweet, dense, smoky smell soaked into the meat and into your memory both. The smokehouse was the heart of how a family fed itself through the winter, and the day the smoke started rising meant the larder would be full. There is nothing in a modern grocery store that smells like a country smokehouse curing hickory smoked ham, and the farm kids who knew it count themselves lucky. Number 5. Long before the sun came up, the smell that started every farm day was coffee perking on the stove. While the kids were still warm under the quilts, Mother had the pot going, and that deep, dark, bitter, rich smell crept up the stairs and pulled the whole house awake. There were no fancy machines, just a percolator burbling on the cook stove, filling the kitchen with a smell strong enough to get a tired farmer up for the milking. Coffee meant the day had begun, that there was work to do and fuel to do it with. A kid too young for coffee still woke to that smell every single morning of his childhood, and it became inseparable from the idea of dawn itself. To this day, the smell of a fresh pot can carry a grown farm child back to a dark kitchen and a mother already up, already working before the rest of the world stirred. Number 4. And right behind the coffee came breakfast, the smell of bacon and eggs frying in a cast iron skillet, and there was no better smell in the world to a hungry farm kid. Thick slices of home-cured bacon, cut from a hog raised right there on the place, sizzled and curled in the pan, the smell filling every corner of the house. Eggs gathered that morning from the hen house cracked into the bacon grease, and biscuits browned in the oven. After the early chores were done, the family sat down to a breakfast big enough to carry them through a morning of hard labor. That smell of frying bacon was the reward for the cold walk to the barn and back, the proof that the farm fed its own. No fast food window, no microwave ever produced anything like the smell of a real farm breakfast cooking on a wood stove at sunup. Number 3. Step into the barn at milking time before light, and the smell wrapped around you like a warm blanket. It was the smell of cattle, their hide and their breath, the sweet hay in the manger, the fresh warm milk hissing into the pail, all of it mixed together in the close, animal warmth of the barn on a winter morning. The cows stood patient in their stanchions, chewing, while Dad or Grandpa milked by hand, the rhythmic streams ringing against the metal. There was hay and manure and milk, and the warm, dusty smell of the animals themselves, and somewhere a barn cat waiting for a squirt of fresh milk. For a farm kid, that barn smell at milking was the most familiar smell on earth, repeated twice a day, every day, year after year. It was the smell of the work that never stopped, and the herd the whole farm was built around. Number 2. If there was one smell that meant home, it was fresh bread baking in the farm kitchen. On baking day, Mother set the dough to rise near the warm stove, and by afternoon the whole house filled with the smell of loaves browning in the oven, yeasty and warm and impossibly good. A farm wife baked bread by the half-dozen loaves, enough to feed a working family for the week, and a kid coming in from chores would catch that smell at the door and feel his stomach answer. The first slice off a warm loaf, with butter churned right there on the farm, was a small piece of heaven. That smell of baking bread had no equal, the kind of smell that meant somebody was home and caring for you, that the kitchen was the center of the world. Of all the smells a farm kid carried into old age, this was the one that meant love. Number 1. And at the very top, the smell no farm kid ever forgets as long as he lives: fresh-cut hay drying in the June sun. When the mower laid the grass down in long green windrows and the sun went to work on it, the whole countryside filled with the sweetest smell in all of agriculture. Green and warm and faintly like vanilla, the smell of summer itself lying in the field. Haymaking was the hardest work of the year, the whole family out racing the weather, but that smell made it worth every aching muscle. And up in the hayloft, where the dried bales were stacked to the rafters, that sweet hay smell lingered all year long, a place where kids played and barn cats hid their kittens, and the whole summer was stored against the winter. Of every smell on this list, fresh-cut hay is the one that says, "Farm," louder than any other. Breathe it in once, and you are a barefoot kid again, standing in a mown field with your whole life ahead of you. That's our 25. Maybe you smelled a few of these reading along: the hay, the coffee, the warm barn at dawn. If you grew up with these smells, do me a favor and tell me down in the comments which one hit the hardest, which one you'd give anything to smell just one more time. And if there's a farm smell I missed, the one your nose still remembers, leave it below so the rest of us can remember it too. Thanks for taking this walk back with me. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.